Hey guys, welcome back. So happy to have you here. Hopefully, you had a fantastic Easter break, and I'm very excited about this particular challenge. Not just because it's very long, but because we have the semicolons and we have a sentence beginning with "and." And many of you guys have always said, "Well, Mr. G, can you really start sentences with "and"?" Yes. If you recall our previous challenge, we ended off by saying. Uh, Today is the day, the aptitude test that will show me which of the five factions I belong in, period. And then it starts with and tomorrow. You can start sentences with and. I'm going to get a little bit more in depth with that as soon as we do our diagramming. But for now, let's look at this sentence as a whole. First of all, when you get a sentence that's this big, don't panic. And I know many of you guys looking at very large sentences find it extremely difficult to diagram it because there's so many things going on. Let's divide things out. Remember, when you're staring at a big sentence like this, it's important to divide it out into workable chunks. So, punctuations are always a good way to start because they give us a clue as to what's being broken up and what kind of ideas are broken up here. So, we have a comma, and it's okay to just put a line there. And then we have another comma. Let's put another line. Then we have our semicolon. Then we have another semicolon. And there you go. So out of this very long sentence, we've just picked one, two, three, four, five separate parts. So now that we got this, let's look at subject and predicate first. Always look at the subject and predicate because once you have this mastered, everything else will kind of fall into place. So we're looking for subjects, and subjects are always found at the beginning. So we have and tomorrow. And is a conjunction, it's not a subject. And tomorrow is typically an adverb. So let's leave that alone. Next, we get at. At, technically, preposition. And again, how do we know this is a preposition? Remember, when you read a word like at, like in, like for, or to, if a question goes with this, like at what, you're dealing with a preposition. You need something to complete this at, and that typically is the object of the preposition, which I'm sure you've already guessed is ceremony. Okay, there we go. So ceremony, object of preposition, and this is at. Next section, and notice how once we have this broken up into sections, it's a lot easier to work with. So in the next one, we have I will decide on a faction. Subject, always at the beginning of our sentence, I, and our predicate will decide. Okay. Next idea, again, I, and we have another will decide. And then we have a third I, subject, and we have the predicate will decide. Awesome. So we have three main ideas of I will decide, I will decide, I will decide, separated by a semicolon. Okay. All of these are independent ideas governed by something similar, which is a decision. So a perfect way here to put a semicolon and tie these together. If you are punctuating, you can also put a period. Okay. So I will decide on a faction, period. I will decide the rest of my life, period. I will decide to stay with my family or abandon them, period. You could also put a comma, but a semicolon here ties all of these thoughts nicely together. Remember, semicolons will join together independent clauses and not separate them. Periods would separate them, commas would definitely separate them, but these bring them together. So now that we have our subject and predicate, let's deal with what happens next. So I will decide in this first one here on. And again, going back to the at, if I'm reading on and I'm saying on what, that becomes a preposition. The object of the preposition in this case is faction. Okay, so this verb does not take a direct object because of the on. However, when we look at the next part, I will decide. What will you decide? We will decide the rest of my life. So there's my direct object, rest. Now, before you start jumping into my life, look at the preposition of, because this is very important. And the preposition of is telling you that I am a possessive. What possesses the rest? Life. Whose life? My life. Okay, so this is all possessive. There we go. POSS. Nice. Next one. I will decide. Now, this decide will take a direct object. And in this case, a direct object that we're looking at is an infinitive verb because we have to, which is a preposition, but stay is an action word. Taken together, it's an infinitive. This is known as an object infinitive. So I'm going to write INF, object. Okay, and object infinitives are verbs that will have their own noun cases controlling them. So we'll decide to stay. Stay is an action word. It's a word where literally your body is performing an action or a motion. Remember that verbs of motion do not take a direct object. Okay, so how do we know that? We'll look at the next word is with. That is another preposition with what? Family. Okay, object of the preposition. Whose family? My family. Possessive. And then we have this or. Okay. So we have two choices, deciding on whether to stay or to abandon. Notice that in English, we're not repeating to. We could. I could just write or to abandon them. But immediately in English grammar, it's implied that this is also an object infinitive. So object infinitive. And this is really cool, guys, because you get to see the difference between a verb of motion like staying versus a verb that takes a direct object like abandon. Because abandon what? Abandon them. Direct object. Okay, so we have two objects infinitive here, two choices for what will be decided, and then we have our conjunction and then we have our adverb tomorrow. Choosing agrees with ceremony. So this is again a verb of, a noun that comes from a verb to choose. If you remember from our last challenge, this is a participle or a gerund. It's a verb turned into a noun, but in this case, it's turned into an adjective because it agrees with ceremony. Perfect. So last but not least, why do we start the sentence with and? Very clearly, if you look at our previous challenge, the character has just told you that today is going to be something. Then there's a period at the end of it. So if I read it one more time to you, today is the day, the aptitude test that will show me which of the 5 factions I belong in, period. Okay, there's a pause, and tomorrow. The effect here that the author's trying to do through the character is to have a pause, and then all of a sudden, something's being remembered. So you can start a sentence with and. You just have to make sure that what precedes your sentence is a thought, and then there's a pause in that thought, and all of a sudden you remembered something else, or something else is coming up. Okay. Typically, you could do without the end, but and is there for effect. All right. With terms of verbs, which is the last thing we're going to do. Second here. Perfect. All of our verbs, I will, and I will, are all first person. Singular. Notice the will here is a future. And it is simple because I will not be, well, it doesn't say I will be deciding. It just says I will decide once. And it's true indicative. Okay, perfect. And infinitives are infinitives. They're just going to be infinitives. So thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you like this challenge. And remember, whenever you get a big sentence like this, break it up and remember the basics. find your subject and predicate, and then slowly go through your now cases to make your reading and your understanding of how to write a lot better. Thank you so much for watching, guys. See you tomorrow. Bye.